right, welcome to Legacies, everyone. Legacies is powered by AVEO, leaders in sustainable vape hardware, and it just so happens two of my guests this week are from AVEO. And another one, Chris. Chris is from ATG Pharma, supplying automation to the industry. Gents, thanks for joining.
Hi there, Tom.
Yeah, great, thanks.
We'll go through
Thanks for
it.
having
There's
us.
a bunch of us who are all like, when should we talk? But let's first get this out of the way. Oilers game 1 tonight. I'm wearing my Plant Life Oilers themed hat. Yeah, right? Ian Scott's going to be happy about this. Been watching it. Van didn't make it. This is like, I get criticized all the time. They're like, where's your Vancouver hat? I'm like, it's in storage till next year. In storage till next year.
I'm going to be a good Canadian and root for the Stanley Cup to come back home to Canada. So
Yeah,
let's go
exactly.
Oilers. Yep.
Exactly. That's all we can hope for.
I'm a shameless Leaf fan, so my heart's been broken
Oh.
many times, especially from the Panthers as well. So definitely do not want to see them win again. So I will be rooting Oilers 100%.
Nice. And Jonathan has no horse in this race anymore. He's in Bangkok joining us at midnight. Man, you're a trooper. Thanks for joining, Jonathan.
No problem.
Okay, so what we'll do then, guys, just because there's a bunch of us this time, there's two of me, but as you can see, but let's go through first just a brief background in your history and what led you to this crazy industry. I still call it crazy. Every week there's something new. You're questioning your sanity. Why are we still doing this? But I think at the end of the day, it's relationships, right? It's building an industry that, it's, we won't say failed to start, but, we're still building this plane as it's taking off, it feels like. So, Chris, let's start with you. What's your background? What led you to ATG Pharma? And what are you finding exciting right now?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for having me on. By the way, it's a pleasure. And Keith and JC, it's good to connect again. Yeah. So just in terms of background, ironically, I know you mentioned it's every day is different, and it's an insane, crazy industry. This is the only industry I know. I came right out of university, second year university, got involved. There's a whole backstory how I got involved with ATG, but long story short, my housemate at Queens, his dad was the original developer of our equipment, and he was just so happy to pass through Kingston on his way to Montreal, and we sat down for dinner. They invited me on a whim, and ended up hearing more about the equipment he was building. He was in the pharmaceutical industry for 15 years prior, and that's why our name is ATG Pharma. The original business model and equipment was designed for the pharmaceutical space, and he was a solopreneur in his garage building this equipment, and I was in business. And one of the things that caught my eye or caught my ear, I guess it was, he said that I build a machine and then I have to sell a machine and then I build a machine. And he didn't really have a proper business strategy, I'd say, or a go-to-market strategy. And the branding was he was an engineer trying to build a website, and a little bit,
Engineers aren't marketers.
older in the generation. So I brought that kind of younger flair. I was 19, 20 years old. I'm 29 now, so I've been in this for 10 years. But kind of brought that original flair, rebranded the website, and then started researching where we could take cannabis. And sure enough, in university, obviously, I loved smoking weed, and that's how I bonded with my other co-founder. And we were buddies, and loved the product. And just so happens that 2015, started doing some research on the early, Tilrays and Auroras, and the early kind of Canadian LPs. And I knew Lyft was a very new trade show, kind of 2015, 2016. And funny enough, I actually have an email that I sent to the original Lyft coordinator and said, "Hey, would this equipment be like applicable for cannabis? Like, I'd really love to get into this industry." And he wrote back, he's like, "I'm not sure. Like, there's definitely the original machine was designed for capsule filling and tinctures and that type of product, not vapes. This is before the world of vapes." And he's like, "Yeah, I think a lot of these guys would need it." And so we just convinced the guys to get a booth. And that was in the summer, and then we actually had like a lineup at our booth. We had guys trying to give us cash, and for a year I was trying to figure out where to sell this equipment. Like, pharma was hard, natural health is hard, and then cannabis, it just was so easy. And I was already like, looking at Porsches. It was hilarious. I was like 20, I was 19. Obviously that didn't happen. I still don't have my Porsche, but it just kind of like everything clicked in that moment. And we just never looked back. Really positioned the whole business into cannabis. We export globally now all over the U.S. We have 350 cannabis clients that use our equipment for vape filling and tincture filling and gummies now. And we just kind of really focused on being that premier automation solution because a lot of these startup companies can't afford the $500,000 or $1 million pieces of equipment. They just need something for $30,000-$40,000 to get started and have
Mhm.
good efficiency and throughput. And that's really how we built the business. And fast forward today and 3 facilities later and a bunch of staff and a bunch of business. It's kind of been insane. It's been like a third of my life now, technically, in this industry. So it's
That's
pretty
wild.
cool. I'm
We
very
can't say
grateful.
that. Well, I can't say that. Well, I should say in the industry, yeah, quasi in the industry, but operating on the legal side, definitely don't have that. But I'm just thinking, those early days Lyft, I remember those days. And when you had a solution, this was the biggest thing. If you had a solution, you won, period. And I'm just thinking,
Yeah.
those early days for them trying to figure out what's it going to look like to fill capsules, what's going to be like to, and get these products out. And then all of a sudden you bring an automation solution. Yeah, they
Oh.
would have been handing you a briefcase full of cash at
I
that
went to
time.
Tilray. I remember 2017 or so. I went to Tilray and they needed to do a production run for their tincture bottles, and they had 8 people with each individual's pipettes and a scale, filling it till it got to 30 grams. And if it was like over under, they would take some out, they would put some back in till it hit the 30 on the scale. And then we dropped in our machine and filled like, a tray of 100 in a minute. And all the operators' jaws were just dropped. They're like, oh my God,
Yeah.
this is incredible. This is supposed to take us all day. We've done it in, you know, 20 minutes or whatever to fill the run they needed to do for some testing. But it was just cool. It was really cool to be able to like go on the ground level and shape the early days of these processes and the efficiencies and work with every single LP when they were getting started.
Yeah.
It was cool for a 22-year-old to just do that, like while people were just figuring out what to do out of school. I was in these cannabis facilities and traveling around Canada and the US and now the world. It's
Yeah.
can't
Wow.
yeah.
What a journey, man. Like I'm thinking through, it's one thing for automation, and I'm sure there would have been outreach. And, Jonathan's been on a previous podcast and we talked about this a little bit, but those early days, it was, yeah, we know we need automation. We know that these things exist, but it was more than just supplying the equipment. There was, you're coming in, you're training them, you're giving them SOPs. And that was the key word in those
Yeah.
days, right? Was okay, but even if we want to take a shit, we need an SOP. Like, okay, you remember the early days? Keith is laughing
Oh
because
yeah.
you and Jonathan, I'm sure you recall this, is early days, you had one RPEC in your facility. And if you were all in the same room, it was like, okay, I got to go to the washroom. All right, everyone clock out. We got to go outside. Everyone's got to wait. And it was complete BS. But bringing the SOPs, I think, was kind of the game changer. And from what I understand with ATG, it was, yeah, here's your automation equipment, but here's your holy grail. This is what you really need. And this is how you're going to operate. Jonathan's been nodding along. We've shared his story, but Jonathan, please, if you could, again, a background, how you landed in vapes, and man, it was, I'm thinking back to the Washington days. I still remember the time that we spent together. But if you could, please, for the audience that's not familiar with you.
Sure. Thomas, it's good to see you again. I'm before cannabis, boring corporate jobs, investment banking, as an analyst, got bored with that, got into computer hardware, ironically manufacturing, working for a Taiwanese company, then got into software, back into banking, in New York, and then, spent some time, overseas in South Korea in broadcast radio and on media, and then back to the States. And as I was coming back to the States, like cannabis was really, I think, kind of going through this legalization movement, first with Colorado, and then with Washington State. And um, I was living in Tacoma, just south of Seattle at the time. Cannabis was something that I knew of. Uh, my mother told me to stay away from it. Most of it.
Good job. Not only am I going to get into it, I'm going to supply the entire industry.
Yeah, so there was a curiosity, and we we started looking at the cannabis industry more on the ancillary side of the business, not being a grower, not being a seller, not even being that much of a consumer of cannabis at the time. So we started off with just a distribution business of ancillary and paraphernalia, and we really kind of copied the C-store distribution model that Coca-Cola and the beer companies use and Frito-Lay uses, of really providing display cases and really creating retail shelves inside of cannabis dispensaries, and supplying them with a whole kind of portfolio of smoking products, whether it was pipes, bongs, herb grinders, um, cans of butane, of rolling papers, you name it, planograms, price melt for them, and and really just made it easy for medical marijuana dispensaries at the time, or collective gardens, to be able to sell accessories but not have to do the work, because we would come in, we'd set everything up, we would show up every week, we would check their sales, we would restock for them, would provide invoices, made it super, super simple. And it was just something that no one was doing at the time, because everyone was so focused on the plant. They were so focused
Mhm.
on selling weed. And it's like, hey, like, you know what, like if you'll do this for us and we'll give you this little corner in our dispensary, that's fantastic. So we went from an idea of doing this literally in a garage, and started with 10 customers in Tacoma, and within a year we were in 350 locations throughout Washington and Oregon.
Wow.
Um, and then, as we did that, we built a reputation of, I think, having some responsibility and consistency and showing up on time, which
It goes a long ways.
That's a difference maker.
which was a difference maker at the time. Being able to open emails and provide an invoice, well, uh, and just kind of goes to show, how it's evolved over the years. But with that, a lot of our customers started telling their other suppliers that were providing weed and cookies and tinctures and whatnot, that, hey, you should talk to these guys because they're reliable. They're really good at distributing products. And so that's when we started getting into actually touching the plant and distributing cannabis concentrates, you name it. And then when legalization happened with I-502 initiative, and having it go from medical to recreational, then our business was completely disrupted at the time, because all of our customers were essentially shut down. And when that happened, we had the experience to get a license, become an operator at the time, and so then we became a licensed operator. During that time, vape was just really, I think, beginning to intersect with cannabis. People were starting to explore 10 years ago. Hey, like, hey, I'm going to take this BHO, and I'm going to, put it into this vape pen and see if it works. And um, it, it worked, but it didn't work well. There was
Mhm.
just tremendous amount of problems with it. And as we began trying to source the right vape hardware for these concentrates, that just became an impossibility, at least being able to find something that was consistent.
Yeah.
So, we spent a lot of time looking at manufacturing, sitting down with factories, and just becoming incredibly frustrated with the entire process, losing tons of money on lost oil, frustrated customers, poor user experience. And so really, I'm not an engineer. It's not my background. I'm not a vape expert. I don't know how these things are made. I knew how to buy them from China. I didn't know how to make them. And I realized that I didn't understand how to troubleshoot these devices. I didn't know what the materials were, what the components were. I didn't know anything about it. Um, and for anyone that is a customer and buying uh, from China, um, my guess is they probably don't know either. And so we felt that the only way that we could solve this problem was to pack our bags, jump on a plane, and literally not just visit China, but to stay there, to camp out at factories and figure out how they make these things, take them apart, break them down, visit not just the factory, which are just the assembly shops, but actually the component suppliers, the metal shops, the plastic shops, the silicone, um, you know, working with like, where are these ceramic coils coming from? How are they being made? What's in that ceramic formulation? And through that process, we really became, I think, what I would say experts in the space because we were the only ones that probably had this vast cannabis experience previously. And now we're really learning and understanding the supply chain and the design and engineering at a very granular level of these devices and then how they intersect. And, we've always thought of Apple and how they created these very simplistic yet sophisticated user experiences, not equipment, not phones, not, you know, laptops, whatever, but they created great user experiences. And
Yeah.
it was that balance of hardware and software and how they intersected. And that's really what we've been about ever since we got into the space was how do we create that great user experience working with the software providers, which are the cannabis companies and the extraction companies, and us being the hardware companies and being able to communicate the needs of each other to build these great user experiences.
Wild, wild. I think it's important to at least look at that user experience for a second because there can be great branding, there can be whatever USP that you want to put out there, but ultimately, if I'm sold on that and I get it home, I unbox it, and it's a horrible user experience, I'm going to tell 10 people. If it's good, I don't tell anyone usually. I always liken it to, I've been a landlord for many, many years. I don't go to my friends and go, hey, so and so paid the rent this month. But when they're behind and I have to evict, I'm like, God damn it, I got to evict this guy. This is going to be horrible in the process. So that user experience is key. As you're thinking there, I've got some questions as we continue, Jonathan. But Keith, Keith and I've gotten to know each other very well. Just a quality guy. But Keith, how did you? I mean, we can have as much time as we want, but how did you land with AVEO? I guess as managing director partner for Canada. But how did you get synced up with Jonathan?
Yeah, a wild story. Go back to about 2021. This is, Ivali crisis, people talking about banning vapes. And I was looking at the best hardware out there. Now, before that, um, you know, into the 2015, I ended up in the cannabis space, and unbeknownst to me, it would be something that I would commit the next 10 years, if not, the foreseeable future, maybe my lifetime, to this field. I'd actually started with a family tragedy. I took a year off. I was in tech and startup at this time, and um, just needed a year off to discover myself.
Mhm.
And I was taking care of my grandmother at this time, and she's 105 years old. She used to get a letter from the Queen and the Prime Minister every year. It
Wow.
was pretty awesome. Um, but I was looking at the pharmaceutical pills she was taking, and it was just a cocktail of pills, and I just didn't even know what they were all for. And it's like, hey doctor, what is this for? Oh, it's to deal with the side effect of this pill. Well, what is that
Yeah.
pill for? Deal with side effect of another pill. And I just said, this is not the quality of life that um, an elderly person who's lived a lifetime would choose. And so I did a bunch of research, and that ended me up researching a lot about natural healing and oils, and that led me to cannabis. And so I actually, I went down the rabbit hole and I said, this sounds right. This sounds like something that would give pain relief and give good quality of life. Let me give it a shot. And I couldn't get it to my grandmother. And
Mm.
a lot of it had to do with politics. It didn't matter if it was legal, if you had the medicinal rights. It just had such a strong stigma that I felt was really wrong. I believe, like, from a social perspective, that people could and should have the choice to make a decision about um, how they live their life and how they medicate.
Mhm.
And so, I'm 33 at this time. I never touch weed. Um, you know, my background, I actually grew up wanting to be a missionary, wanted to teach people about goodness and the Bible. And so I've never had a cigarette in my mouth, don't do drugs, I don't drink. Um, Very rarely socially I drink. But then, when it came to this perspective of cannabis, something hit me here. Uh, I became an advocate before I ever smoked my first joint. And so I went out there and I discovered all of advocates. I learned all about them. And fortunately enough, here in Vancouver, the West Coast here, we're the driving scene behind legalization, behind the use of cannabis and the rights of cannabis. And we always have been. And so I got to know some incredible leaders here and leaders that inspired me and led me through this journey where, as a management consultant, I helped a lot of dispensaries. I helped grow them, help market them, and one of the things I discovered back in 2015 under a dispensary is that there's a huge growth, a huge demand for concentrates. So this was a time when I remember Shatter selling for like $60. Um, it was a deal if you got it under $50. People thought Shatter was the best. The butter started coming out, and people are like, "What is this terpy stuff? This is terrible. It doesn't great." People would complain and get returns. Uh, and one thing that I noticed was really strong was vapes. And just from the angle of the medicinal use, the fact that you could dose it, that it could be discreet, you could carry it around, instantly caught my attention. And I said, this is the future. So, I sold quite a bit of vapes at that time. I helped a lot of people get vapes into their dispensaries, and just the failure rates were terrible. And then a company, C-Cell, came along and changed the game. The 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 failure rates went from like 30% down to 5%, and everyone thought that
Wow.
was like amazing. And then I started noticing a lot of producers changing over to a brand called AVD, and I simply asked them why, and they said, "Well, it's better hardware, it's easier to cap, and the flavor is great, and the failure rates are below a C-cell." So that really caught my attention, and as I was learning more and more about it, the person who I learned the most from before I ever met him, well, it was Jonathan. I found a bunch of podcasts. I started listening. I was like, wow, this group really cares about safety, and it was just unlike anything I saw. Like it was just eye opener that there's a lot more to vapes than meets the eyes. And with the Evoli crisis, it really put a focus on safety and heavy metals leaching. So one thing led to another. Actually, instead of going deep into this space and being an operator, together with my partner, we decided to become vertically integrated investors.
Mhm.
And to finish off the story, one of the companies I was really looking at, in looking at the vape space, was AVD. And so, one thing led to another. I met Jonathan through a crazy story on Reddit, actually, and we got talking. And while this journey happened, there's a transition between AVD and what was going on there, and a new company called AVEO.
Mhm.
And AVEO was supposed to be, something that was forward thinking, was new innovation, and, through a series of discussion, I think Jonathan was just really impressed with my background, my knowledge in the industry, but also my commitment to excellence and social causes. And we had a deep discussion, and I said, this is a space that I care a lot about. I'm also invested in several different hardware companies, but none of them have the type of expertise, the background, the QA and the care, and the cannabis background that AVEO has. And
Mhm.
so we've gotten to be good friends and great business partners. And I'm proud to say that like all four of us have been in this space for over 10 years, over a decade. And it's mind blowing to me because the future, despite the current conditions being challenging, we just can't deny that the demand and the learnings behind this plant continues to impress everybody.
Mhm.
There's a market that I care about, and I think more importantly, I care about good oils going into good products,
Yeah.
good hardware.
Yeah.
And of course, meeting Chris, being one of the premier leaders in the space, ATG, dominating Canada. A lot of those folks that Chris mentioned, that you know just threw money, just wanted to fill. A lot of those folks were legacy guys,
Right.
legacy guys that I focus on, that I help serve and brought professionalism to, and so we got to know each other and just the guys and everyone here is just really likable and very genuine. And so I'm attracted to building communities with genuine people and, taking this industry further.
Yeah. Well, that's incredible. And like I said, I know that the history is much broader than that. We'd be here for a little while, so we'll have you on another podcast where we just break that down because but 105. Wow, that's crazy. That's
Uh,
awesome.
on paper, she was actually 110, but in reality, we think that she's anywhere from 5 to 10 years younger. So
Oh
it's
my
still
god.
over 100.
That's crazy. That's so awesome, though. That's awesome. So I wanted to ask this question, and Chris, you kind of already alluded to it, I think, by your entrance into the industry, which is I always ask, like what comes first here, the chicken or the egg, right? And in the case of, Jonathan sees a need, he's like, okay, hold on. These, nicotine vapes and what's servicing the industry right now aren't going to work. Pack your bags, family, or we're moving, and we're going to go figure this out. But in the case where, your business partner's father, Chris, reminds me of like a Steve Wozniak in a shed somewhere putting something together. Well, he was already servicing the pharma industry. What was that pivotal point where they're like, hold on, they're going to need automation? Was it you discovered that internally? Was it an outreach? Was it your first call to lift going, hold on, cannabis, there's something big going to happen here? I'm trying to understand where that chicken and egg situation was here because automation, I mean, nowadays, unless you're doing very small volume, I get, which I don't even know why you would want to compete if you're doing small volume, but just curious from your point of view, what would have come first?
I mean, I think in general, I mean, one of the kind of things in business is that you don't really know where one opportunity or saying yes to one thing leads to another. And I mean, did I have this whole premonition that cannabis needed this automation when I said yes to help this guy in a garage? I mean, I can't say I did. And I think a lot of business owners don't really know where their businesses end up taking them, right? And I think that's where, being pretty green and just wanting to build a business, I just said yes to opportunities and was hungry and tried a bunch of different things that weren't working and finding new industries that, didn't really necessarily need the equipment. And cannabis was just one thing that, like I said, I was passionate about it and was a user of the product and saw a need and a trend. But wasn't any crazy, premonition or thought. It was just find lift, and lift worked out well and just rode it. I can't say much. But I mean, at the end of the day, I think a lot of people, obviously, a lot of businesses that are successful start with one idea or one concept, and the owner just keeps pivoting and changing and finding those gray areas. And those opportunities, because even when we first started, can vapes wasn't even a thing, right? And we just kept
Mm,
listening to our customers and meeting with these LPs and finding out, what their needs are and saying yes to new developments. And that's how we kind of stumbled onto the vape side, is that, the original equipment was designed for capsules. And then we started getting into the e-cigarettes, and also with cannabis companies looking for tincture bottles. And we started pivoting the equipment to tinctures and said, yeah, sure, we could do that. And, had a few iterations and sent them out to the market, and they failed, and customers came back and said, hey, this doesn't work that well, but have you thought of this? And then, we pivot
mm,
the solution again, and then try that and say, hey, try this now. Does this work better? And then, we just it was just a constant iteration. And when we were small and lean, we could do that. And that's when we had the most growth, to be honest. As companies get larger and you start getting engineering and development plans, I find that from a creativity standpoint and an iteration standpoint, it slows it down. But when you're, a few guys in a garage and you're meeting with companies and you're getting all these ideas, and you can work hand in hand with these early day companies. I mean, that's what we really did, and we just leaned super deep into that.
mhm.
And we let the customers really build, how our equipment is today was really from the use case and iteration from these businesses. So,
Yeah.
um,
Well,
yeah.
I think the innovation, obviously, and Jonathan, I'm going to touch on, the hemp plastics and sustainability because that's major innovation. I want to focus a little bit on innovation in the industry in general. So, in that vein of innovation, Jonathan, super impressed with what you've done with hemp plastics and the move forward for sustainability, and I think that's important. But I'm curious when it comes to manufacturing, just in general, right? So, Chris, have you seen any issues? I mean, we've got all this tariff bullshit going on now. Like, as a Canadian manufacturer, and then Jonathan echoed this as well, and maybe Keith, where you see it, but is there advantage to being in Canada now? Because I know that you have what, 3 facilities? I don't know if you manufacture at all 3, but maybe it's distribution. Is there an advantage with that, or is there now a disadvantage?
This is for me.
Yeah.
Yeah, it has been difficult for the US. So in terms of like our customer spread from an ATG perspective, we have about around 60 Canadian cannabis companies we work with on a regular basis. Then we have 200 in at least in the US, and that number is
Wow.
growing. Obviously new states coming online. So it has posed a challenge from the US perspective. The final piece and one of our kind of ways we're shifting the business is we are going very heavy into Europe. So Europe business year over year has grown at least 15 to 20% in
Wow.
terms of our total client base. Um, just obviously new countries coming online there, and kind of reminding me of Canada and the US in 2015, 2014 even. So it's fun to be able to work with those companies and set up the SOPs and the structure as we were alluding to
Mhm.
earlier.
Yeah.
Because a lot of them are still not knowing what type of hardware to use. They've never heard of free racked, trays. They only know of 510, and they don't, it's so new and it's fun and exciting to be able to share that knowledge. And I think to tie that back to your original question was that being Canadian, I find going into Europe and being a global supplier, which is what ATG we want to be. Being Canadian has helped that. I think,
Yeah, yeah. And
they really lean on us as that industry standard, kind of that pharmaceutical. In Europe, you need EU GMP. In Canada, in the early days, you needed GMP, facilities, and a lot of Canadian companies are doing EU GMP just for export. So we're tied with that. So we've really been able to like lean into that from a branding perspective and a value add to a lot of the new entrants in Australia even too, and in
mhm.
Europe, other countries globally. So
Yeah.
that plus is exciting. We're just kind of taking that with stride and at least taking the opportunity to leverage that up. From a US perspective, it hasn't hindered us too much, but obviously you have the rhetoric, and we have some competitors in the US,
Yeah,
so
yeah,
there are
yeah.
there are going to be guys that are like, I might as well just support a US based company, which is all the power to it. We can't have everyone, but we have
Yeah.
some works of setting up some facility and some manufacturing down in the US as well, just because the market is there, and we
Yeah,
need to
yeah.
keep supporting that.
Yeah, for sure. And then, so Jonathan, when like in the early days of, vape manufacturing, were you thinking automation at the time? Like, were you like, okay, no one's going to sit and fill 10,000 vapes by hand? And then where did that relationship, or at least the idea of we need to start working with and partner up with some automation?
Yeah, I mean, I think that because of our background as an oil processor in South Seattle, that we had firsthand experience of what our customers really went through because that was us. And so when
Mhm.
you kind of think about how we were kind of defining and kind of developing our business, it was really to solve our own problems, knowing that the problems that we had are also problems shared by others in the industry as well. And so I think that that gave us a very unique perspective compared to a lot of our competition at the time, which was simply Chinese factories working with either Chinese trading companies or American customers buying from these Chinese factories. But there's always, I think, a bit of a disconnect in work with us because we wore both sides, or we wore both hats on
Mm.
both sides of the fence. That it gave us a lot of perspective. So when we started looking at the current product SKUs back when we first started, you guys probably all remember most all the 510 thread cartridges were thread on, screw on
Right.
Yeah.
mouthpieces, right? Um, we lived that nightmare of having to fill those cartridges and having to twist on
It's
mouthpieces one by one. And then And then there was C-Cell, and we were huge fans of C-Cell as well. In fact, C-Cell really was one of the inspirations for us to go to try and say, hey, you know what, if C-Cell can make a better, more reliable cartridge, still needs some improvement that we thought, but they gave us the blueprint to do so, and made us realize it was possible.
Mm.
So that's when we started really looking at, okay, they've got this press fit. It requires an arbor press, single-handed, pressing a mouthpiece on one by one. And so we recognized that that was a bottleneck. And so it really came down to how could we create a press-on mouthpiece that would create a perfect vacuum seal, but do it in a manner that required very little torque or pressure, so that we could do more than one at a time.
Mm.
And so that was where we really started working on, essentially what we call, the press fit or easy press, which the entire industry kind of, I think, has adopted that description of being able to pre-rack mouthpieces, use a very low torque design to be able to cap and lock the mouthpieces onto these carts. So yeah, I mean, I would say that was something that, again, as an business operator in Seattle, of making these cartridges, we saw that was one of the biggest pain points in our business, and we wanted to solve that through our hardware offerings.
Yeah. Wow. Man, I'm thinking of how all the pieces come together now. And then Keith, like, how do you sell it, right? Because I think it's one thing to, yeah, there's people don't put a lot of thought into these things, right? On what it takes from the automation side and XY axis, and it's got to go up and it's got to go down, and it's got to do this, and it's got to be, so perfect. And then I don't know, like, do LPs just look at, I need a vape, I need automation, and I'm done, and that's it? Or, because I know with our time spent now, understanding aperture size, what type of oil, viscosities, this all comes into play. How much learning, or, well, I guess learning on their side, but teaching is there in order for, these producer processors to understand the complications behind what creates failure in the industry, I guess?
You touch on a very important point, I should say. Um, Back in the days, hardware was and still is majorly coming from China. And so Chinese folks and manufacturers, they just don't know cannabis oils. They can't touch it, they can't smoke it. Unless they fly over to North America, it's prohibited.
Hmm.
So you've got this disconnect. You've got these manufacturers that are creating to spec a hardware where they actually don't know how it interacts with the final oils in order to create the final product. That's where expertise matters quite a bit. And us here in North America, we're very fortunate because we can touch the oils and we can um, test out different variables to make sure it's optimized. In the earlier days, LPs and any producer out there, they would just buy whatever their friends told them
Right.
worked, and then they would just throw it in the market and hope it all works. However, we've noticed that in our category, in the vape side, it's the highest returned category in Canada and in
Yeah.
the state.
Yeah.
But
I
it's
just saw
also
I
the
saw the
fastest growing
OCS
category.
numbers. I just recently saw the OCS numbers, and I'm like, "Whoa." Like, it doesn't sound, with the amount of vapes that get pumped out in Canada, it doesn't seem like that much, but that's the largest category of complaints. And I think it was something for Ontario alone, almost 22,000. I was like, "Whoa." I think, Jonathan, I even sent that to you, and I'm like, "Look at this." And you're like, "Yep." So, and so how important, I mean, like it's got these conversations, because, I talk to a ton of LPs, and I'm like, "What are you using?" And I get samples. I've got boxes and boxes of cannabis samples, right? Some of them are vapes, and I'll pull a vape out. They get one try with me, one try. And I know that sounds horrible, but if I take a haul off of it and it's plugged out of the package, and I've been told, "Oh, do you know how to unclog it?" I don't want to fucking unclog it. I want it to work out of the package. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I just, what the complaint side, LPs, pay attention. you're putting a product out. You don't want failure. Like you don't want that. Sorry, Keith, continue. I had to go off my little tangent there for a second.
You hit it on the mark. People just want something that works, which is the reason why there's such a huge rise in all-in-ones, because
Mm,
all-in-ones generally work. And the reason why is because there's three variables to making a successful vape experience. The first one, and the most important, is just reliable hardware. The second one is the manufacturer and their SOPs. And the third one is the end consumer.
mm,
How do they use the vapes? What batteries do they buy? These are all questions that need to be answered in order to really get to the root of why there's such large returns. And what I would say is, if you choose the wrong hardware manufacturer, right off the bat, you're dead in the water.
yeah.
If they don't have the right SOPs, if they don't ask the right questions about how your oil is interacting, you're done, because you're gambling with your brand. You're gambling with massive returns. And believe me, there's some folks that I know that lost 6 figures and more because they wanted to save a penny.
Yeah.
So actually, saving money is actually very expensive in the vape industry.
Yeah.
And of
Yeah.
course, the second one being, manufacturing. Well, what are you using to fill? Are you using an ATG machine? Another type of filling? Like some folks do manual filling. Some people still use the original syringe. Um, each one of those things will require different SOPs because your capping time, how you go about, letting the heating core saturate, all those things matter. And then the third part, which is something that is very difficult for manufacturers to control, is the end user.
Mm,
Because the end users, they'll go, hey, what's the best vape out there? And they'll go and search for the cheapest battery, a battery that might not work well, that might burn the oil, that
yeah.
might not have the proper settings. And so, are they vaping, when it's 40 degrees outside? Are they vaping if it's minus 40 out there? All those are variables that need to be examined in order to really optimize the vape experience.
Yeah.
And those are some of the things that we're trying to get out to create standards to. There's an organization called CSAC, the Cannabis Standards of, I'm sorry, it's the Canadian Standards of Cannabis.
Hmm.
And that's led from Pierre Killin. And Pierre Killin is really trying his best to create enforceable standards that push this industry forward. And I'm just very fortunate to be a board member there overseeing the vape division, together with Walker Patton from Woody Nelson there.
Woody Nelson. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you got it. So it's these social causes. It's creating a better industry, lowering the return rate through education. Like all those things really fit the things that I value and the things that I believe really matter in this industry.
Yeah. I was just thinking as you're going through that, Keith, like I never thought about the temperature outside, right? Like, but of course, let it, sit in your car if it's minus 40, plus 40, whatever it might be. But now I'm thinking as well, when we're talking about innovation, all in one scare the shit out of me for the environment. And I know they do JC as well, which is, and we'll get to it. I know Jonathan's probably chomping at the bit. This is what we're going to talk about the whole show. No, but I'm curious from Chris's side, when you've got vape manufacturers, and I've seen the facility, I've been, when they're manufacturing the jigs, putting in like huge CNC machines that these go into. But is there ever a frustration where you've got a vape supplier like an AVEO that goes, "Hey, we've got another one. Hey, we've got another one. Can you guys build jigs for these? Because I know there's some customization." Jonathan, you were playing around with design the one time. You modeled a vape after a Cybertruck, and I'm like, the first thing I could think of was ATG going, they're going to need another jig if these ever fly. Like they just, but is there ever any frustration at all? Or is it like, how do you keep up? Because in the early days, it was 510s, which probably Avail is kind of leading the charge in the pre-filled when it comes to having those stacked and ready to go into the jigs. But like, is there complication there at all? Or are you just like, nah, it doesn't matter. We can handle it.
I think it's twofold. No frustration, because I think it also is our big value add as a manufacturer, right?
Mm,
Like that's something that we need to lean into. I mean, why get frustrated on something that gives you that competitive edge or advantage? So we've leaned into it. We have an engineer or a couple engineers on the team that are just dedicated to working with hardware companies like AVEO and looking at the new developments and making sure that we can support the infrastructure and the jigs to make it seamless, right? To Jonathan's point and Keith's point, we like our goal really is to have a situation where an LP can come and say, "Hey, I want this vape," and we've already done everything in the back end to make sure that it's seamless from a manufacturing standpoint, an efficiency standpoint, an SOP standpoint, so that they can just say, "Yep, I want this vape." Okay, done. We've already done the testing. We've already validated it. We already have the relationship with the hardware supplier. All we need to do is just put in the order, and we've taken care of everything in the background. So
Nice.
that's something that we really focused on, and we're see that as a big advantage. And I mean, look, at the end of the day, these cannabis companies are dealing with a million things. I think the last thing they want to do is try to navigate a conversation between their equipment supplier, manufacturer, and their hardware supplier and say, "Hey, get together and try to develop something." I mean, we want to take care of them in the background so that it's absolutely seamless for them.
Yeah, that's the way it should be done, right? I mean, that's
Yeah.
how true relationships are built. This industry is very relational. Is there
But it was never
anything?
that before. Like just to Keith's point, it
Yeah,
was this is a pretty new thing, I would say, in the last couple of years that a lot of us have as a collective in the background have leaned into. I mean, I think early days it was just buy vapes from here, and then we're trying to make trays and things fit, and we don't really know who the hardware guys are, and so now these relationships have just made such a huge difference for the end user.
yeah,
Um,
yeah, for sure.
yeah.
Okay, all in. I'm not going to say that 510s are going the way of the dodo bird. I'm not going to say that. They're still going to be in a place. They're still going to be here. Keith, to your point, batteries matter, which I found out the hard way, eons ago now. But why does this taste like shit? It's supposed to be high terps. What's going on? Well, I was cooking them off. So I am concerned, obviously, as I think a lot of intelligent people are when it comes to all-in-ones, right? They're not recyclable. They're making their way to landfill. They are on the rise globally. So, two questions. I'll allow you to all answer how you would like, but is there a point in time certain governments are going to go, no, we're done. We're not going to allow them. I know some regions as they're forming up are going, yeah, okay, but not vapes, not doing that. Is there any concern in the industry globally that there'll be certain large volume countries that say nope, no all in ones?
Well, I mean, I think you just look at history, and I think any industry that is creating unnecessary waste and pollution over time, that there is that there's a consumer and public concern that is created, and then reactively, then there are regulatory and policy frameworks that come into the conversation. And I don't think of all-in-ones being any different than uh, when we first got into cannabis back in 2014, 2015 in Washington State, and the Liquor Control Board was overseeing the cannabis rollout of legal processors, and uh, they had all of these rules and regulations around testing the oils and weed for what microbial and THC and terpene content and stuff like that, but no one was testing for pesticides, right?
Mm,
Um, it was just completely off the grid. No one was thinking about it. And then all of a sudden, the Stranger, which was a local Seattle newspaper, came out with this kind of expose or kind of investigative report where they went and they pulled a bunch of products out of retail stores, and they tested just crazy amounts of pesticides because oils are concentrated,
mm,
right? So it's like, if you have trace amounts of pesticides in flour, well, when you extract that and concentrate it, now you've got concentrated levels, and now people are ingesting that. So I just think that there's a lot of blind spots when it comes to policy, and cannabis is relatively new compared to other industries. In a lot of ways, we're still in our infancy and still kind of learning and growing and maturing. So I think that vape in general is a blind spot because regulators and policymakers, they don't understand, or it's kind of, out of sight, out of mind, because these things aren't being manufactured locally or domestically, the hardware side. Now on the
Mhm.
software side, and I, op- I always refer to cannabis as software, um, they're more advanced and I think more proactive and focused on that. But it's like, well, how do you police the hardware when it's all being imported from a foreign country halfway around the world, and you don't really have any experts, and the cannabis companies that are buying these products, um, they don't have internal specialists, right? They don't have people's like, oh, hey, like, yeah, I'm an engineer. I work for this cannabis company, and I know how these things are made, how they're produced. I know how to troubleshoot them. They're relying on salespeople and Chinese
Mm.
factories to troubleshoot and provide
Right.
technical support. Um, and when there's this client vendor relationship, there's a level of lack of transparency, let's call it. There's things that they probably don't want you to know. Um, and I think the other thing too is that many people have come to me and said, your message about sustainability and this pie in the sky dream of someday of being able to build, collection and local refurbishment and recycling programs and all this stuff. They're like, at the end of the day, you're kind of trying to promote a concept of creating less waste, which means less sales. You're selling less
Mm.
products. Like if I can salvage every battery and create a program to do that, then I'm not selling a new battery
Right.
because we're reusing it. So it goes against making money, right?
Mhm.
So cannabis companies, they don't want to solve that problem. They don't want to produce sustainable vape products. They don't want to produce products that last forever. The whole pods and replaceable hardware devices. It's not that we can't make this stuff, it's because they don't want to. Disposables are a dream for a Chinese factory
Mhm.
because they get to, consider 510 thread. In 510 thread, okay, we can sell a 510 thread cartridge and we can sell it over and over and over again, but that battery remains, the customer buys it, they keep it, they use it until they lose it, but they recharge it. There's a button on it, there's a chipset in it, there's a casing, all these materials. You sell that battery to that customer once, and maybe they use it for 3, 4, 5, 6 months, right?
Mhm.
Before they
Mhm.
buy another one. But with the disposable, you got to sell it to them every single time, over and over and over
Right.
again. And so to me, that's where um, policy has to come in, I think, unfortunately, because private industry doesn't really promote sustainability.
Right.
And if you're creating convenience and you're getting the price points to a point where the consumer recognizes that convenience and benefits from that convenience, then there's no stopping it. And that's where the grown-ups have to come in and say, hey, we've got to put a speeding like we've got to put a sign here that says only drive 25 miles an hour in a neighborhood street, because you know Bobby and Tommy that are playing basketball over here, if they run out into the street, like we've got to create some safety
Mhm.
measures here. And so to me, I don't think that sustainability is a trend. I think that it is inevitable that we are going down that pathway, and it's just a matter of time.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. I didn't really think about it in a couple ways, but now I'm curious, Keith, are you seeing demand from the supplier, or I shouldn't say the suppliers, LPs? I'll still call them LPs, license holders. I think we shifted to a while ago, but they're always LPs in my heart. Um, are you seeing any demand for it? Is it more education? Like where does that demand push pull come from? Is it although because I see Jonathan's posts, right? He's putting it out there. He's putting it out there. Not all LPs are on, LinkedIn and socials and stuff. But I'm just curious, like where's that fulcrum point, right? Where we finally get, okay, yeah, I'm going AIO, but now I need to be sustainable.
You got it. So almost all the inquiries now are about AIOs.
Mm,
Uh, Folks feel like they're not moving forward if they're just focused on 510 thread, just because the competition is so great. And the way things are set up here in Canada, um, the groups that actually have the most amount of power, it's actually the provincial boards and the large retailers. So if the provincial boards choose not to buy your brand, you're shot. You're not able to actually make enough money to survive. Um, Direct delivery is very costly. Flow through is very costly. But getting it into the OCS or the BCLDB, it's almost like a gold mine.
Mm.
It's what everybody is looking to get, massive distribution. You take it a step further, retailers, everybody in the chain here needs to make money. So if retailers are selling and they're noticing that more and more people are buying all-in-ones, then they're going to go and purchase all-in-ones, and they're going to go and tell their provincial boards, buy more of these. The last time I heard from both Alberta as well as from Ontario, all-in-ones are zooming. They're just flying. And so all the inquiries I get from LPs are, first and foremost, okay, well, what do you have in all-in-ones? And they want something different. They don't want to be the same as everybody else. So they want customization. They want different colors. They want to work within the framework, but be different. And just to answer, and going back to some of the things that we were chatting earlier about, a lot of people will look at this from an environmental perspective. All-in-ones are bad, batteries, waste, all those things, which are all true. I was on a webinar, the Project Stewardship Institute based in the States, and it was about addressing vape product waste. This was back sometime in October last year. There were a couple of folks, one from Colorado, Shelley Fuller, responsible for managing pollution in Colorado, and Jennifer Volkman, based out of Minnesota. And both of them opened up a perspective I never imagined. They were both saying that there are folks that want to do the right things and they want to recycle. And of course, we're going to have to assume that the majority of the population, they're just going to throw in the trash can. Both of them are extremely dangerous. Recycling plants don't know how to handle vapes. It's this hazardous waste to them. Garbage trucks, they have, if there's a vape in there and that garbage machine crushes it, it leads to fires. Like, people are actually dying because of this.
Jeez.
Fires are being started at recycling facilities, and lithium battery, you just can't use a regular fire extinguisher. Like, there's things that folks need to learn and they have to understand. And those are things that are not being talked about. But those things are not only hurting the environment, but they're hurting people. They're impacting lives. They're burning people. Sometimes people don't make it through; they die. So we have to look at it beyond just from a sustainable Earth side. We have to look at how is it impacting people and our everyday consumers, the youth, the next generation. And from that angle, me being a father, I've got 2 little daughters. I think about that quite often. It's actually what drives me for, healthy oils and healthy hardware. It's thinking about the next generation and knowing that at some point my kids are going to come across cannabis, and more likely than not, when they come across it, it's going to be in the vape form. So, we're doing, at least we get the opportunity, the 4 of us and this whole generation that's in cannabis right now during the early days, to really adjust what the future looks like. And if we do it right, we'll have these recycling programs. We'll have sustainable hardware. And I believe AVEO and Jonathan and Hannah in particular, the founders, are leading the way here and influencing other large manufacturers who might just be conservative and followers. But when there's enough demand from the consumers, when they understand how much of an impact this is having on society, on the earth, and they start demanding sustainable solutions, that's when we truly make a difference.
Yeah.
And those are things that, matter a lot too. They should matter a lot to folks.
Yeah. Wow. That's a good point. I never really would have thought it that way. My best friend is a first responder firefighter, and the training they have to go through for lithium fires. And I'm not talking Teslas. I'm just talking lithium fires in general. Is crazy because you can almost not put them out. As I was thinking, you're talking about the sustainability, and I'm thinking the Earth Palm and some of the reserve products that are out there. Uh, I've got a vape. I had quit smoking a while back. Got a vape. I refill a pod. Okay. Jonathan, is this ever going to come? Like, are we going to see? And Keith, we've talked about this a little bit before, and I think that certain THC limitations will come into play. Taxation may become an issue, but it's kind of two part because I'm curious: will we see that? Because I think it's possible. And then, how does that get solved from the automation side? And Chris, you may just go, "We're just filling. We're still filling. It doesn't matter. We're still filling." But in the offside of that, what would happen if, okay, I can buy a bottle of cannabis juice, not nicotine juice? What happens in the impact of the business potentially across both? So one, will we see refillable pods? Two, how does that impact businesses both for automation and the vape supply companies? Whoever wants to answer first.
There's a couple things there. One, I'm curious, kind of Chris's perspective or just his experience of what he's seeing as far as trends right now among the pretty large portfolio of customers that you guys have on really 510 thread to all-in-ones to pods, because what we saw, I think, is, I mean, 510 thread has been king for from the moment that we've stepped in this space. And then we did see, I think, these pods kind of come into the market, um, and then it had a very short life cycle, and it just went straight to all-in-ones. Now, I can understand the all-in-one issue. You go back to the fact that there's that vape has a fairly high failure rate as far as compared to other product categories, and I think there's obvious reasons around that. And so I do think that one of the incentives for a lot of manufacturers going into all-in-ones is it's a more controlled experience, right? Like, some of the product failure is oftentimes consumer, um, you know, just lack of knowledge. This open architecture, which we kind of call the windows of vaping, is when you've got this open platform and you've got all these different manufacturers making different batteries, different cartridges. While they're compatible, they're glitchy, they're buggy because there's just slight deviations and variations of it. And then you've got a consumer that says, "Oh, hey, you know what? I've got the ability to to put this battery on 4.5 volts, right?" Um, and not realizing that it's just going to just burn the hell out of that cartridge, and now all of a sudden they think that it's a hardware failure or it's a brand failure, or it's no one's fault, but it's certainly not theirs. Um, and so I see the benefit of all-in-one. To me, pods is kind of like that best of both worlds, because you can kind of create a controlled user experience.
Mm.
At the same time, it's less wasteful. But from my understanding, or the complaints that we had oftentimes heard, was that brands trying to launch a pod system, being able to essentially uh, build a customer base and force them into, hey, buy this battery that's proprietary, that's unique. Um, that's a challenge. And then the other one is that when that customer has that battery, then it prevents them from having access to different brands and different options, which 510 thread gives you. And then the moment that you know, you're out with your friends and you don't have your one battery for your pod, and you want to stop into a dispensary or retail store, um, you're not going to buy another one. You're typically going to buy a disposable or a 510
Mm.
thread or something that's cheap to just kind of get you by, right?
Yeah.
So to me, there's reasons why pods haven't been successful, but to me, pods are, oftentimes things kind of go full circle, and to me, it's kind of like, how do you build a cost convenience of all in one, but reduce waste by making it affordable enough that you can treat it like a pod.
Mm.
And again, I haven't seen a lot of interest in pods lately. I haven't seen a lot of brands out there saying, "Hey, we're looking for a pod system." So I'm kind of curious, Chris, kind of like your perspective, if if you're dealing with customers that have kind of a proprietary platform using a pod type of offering and being successful with it.
Yeah, and I think just to, I guess, first go back to Tom's question, just in terms of trends and that refillable concept. I think you have to look at nicotine and the pod, consumer behaviors that we're seeing there. I mean, the early day e-juice was refillable juice into these big mods. I mean, you rarely see that at all, if even that exists now, right? So I think consumer behavior is for cannabis in terms of disposables and vapes in general is following what consumers are doing on the nic side. I mean, why would you have a whole different process? And I don't think people want to get their hands dirty. Maybe this like niche nuance consumer lounge kind of use type that might be this like, think about it from like having a scotch in whiskey, in the alcohol industry, something that's a little bit more higher end and once in a while. But I think from like a convenience and day-to-day perspective, I mean, I think all ones are the way to go, and we're seeing that trend that you just can't beat the convenience and the way all the new designs that we're seeing now. I mean, we're seeing a lot of designs, Jonathan, to your point now, for all-in-ones that are mimicking that, elf bars and those types of designs. A lot of cannabis companies that we're working with, I mean, if not all of them, are all starting to shift to that vape look. Just because I think the consumers are familiar with it. They see it out socially, they see it at parties. I mean, it's I think it's just a use form and a type of device that consumers are used to. And so we're seeing that, Jonathan, from across the board, just working with a lot of the large MSOs in the US. We're not seeing much pods. We're obviously still seeing 510s, but the shift to all-in-one and the shift to that look as close as possible to that elf bar shape is just the biggest trend we've seen in the last 6 months. I mean, we've had to redesign a lot of trays and holders for all different types of, large MSOs and large guys in the US and in Canada who are moving the needle in terms of trends. That's what they're all starting to do in the background that we're seeing are those types of products.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'm curious, just as I was thinking that an innovation in that vein again is there's these, Jonathan, you can probably tell me why you're not doing them, but these switchable vapes where you can go from one flavor to another. Chris, how the hell do you fill that? Does it require two goes? And you got to refill because I've seen the systems. I mean, the RoboCap, the
Yep.
300 wild, the 500 wilder, but you've got your vessel, it's heated, you heat your lines, it moves on its XY axis, fills
Yep.
them. But then I was just thinking as you're talking about that, I'm like, well, hold on. There's some that's switched now. To me, it's a little gimmicky. It's I'm not coming hard on, anyone that's filling them necessarily or putting them out there in the market, but like, is it just a redo? So this vessel first, then the next one. You must be dealing with the companies that produce them.
Yeah, I think I'm not trying to say it's gimmicky, but I think obviously everyone's just trying to search for something that's unique and
Yeah.
different. I mean,
Yeah.
you're just trying to find any little gray area that you can market and sell to. So there's that, and also just I mean, we might as well say it, but like the larger volume vapes is something that we're seeing a lot more, and people a lot of companies are trying to push that the 2 gram, 3 gram. Now I'm starting to see some stuff again. I'm not, I don't know from a
Wow.
regulation perspective where that's getting pushed, but it's come across our testing lab and R&D to make devices and jigs for 3 grams. I've seen a double 3 gram,
What?
so it's 6 total that we've been asked to test.
Holy smokes.
Um, but yeah, from our device perspective, we essentially the beauty of our equipment, the flexibility of the XYZ jig, we just have two simultaneous vessels side by side that have two separate lines and two separate
Mm.
nozzles going into the tray. And the way we can program is you can simultaneously fill two unique product SKUs into 2 unique chambers at the same time,
Okay.
that are
Yeah.
cross-contaminated, you know, and allows you to fill that double dose.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. Now,
separate line,
did they
separate
come
dose.
to you guys first and go, "Hey, we're thinking of this," right?
That's all that
And then,
happens.
"Okay,
That
we gotta
we
figure it
just
out."
take projects. We
Yeah.
don't predict the
"I've got
future.
some ideas for you, my friend. We'll talk offline." No, just
I
kidding.
love it. It's my favorite part of the favorite part of the job is just working with new, you know, new ideas and new groups, and working with our engineering team to develop it. And if it has legs and we're starting to see trends, then we're like, okay, this isn't just an applications test for a one-off customer. This is a product, you know,
Mm,
solution that we could start offering to our rest of our customer base. So that's how our business model works. You know, we're an engineering applications team first, and then we'll shift it to an actual product solution that we can start to market to our customer base if it's you know, if it's a trend that that makes sense and fits
yeah.
what we can do.
Jonathan, how many cycle counts or I'm just thinking again, so these switchable vapes come out. Obviously, it takes some balls to launch a product that's brand new in a market, especially from a device side. Then you've got the brand that has to get on side with it. How many cycles does that have to go through in testing before you go, yeah, it's going to work? Like, I'm just thinking, is it thousands, hundreds of thousands? I don't know.
Um, yeah, I mean that's a really good question. I think that the trend that you're seeing is that when there's and what Chris was mentioning earlier is that with the rapid commoditization of, I think, the industry in general, where cannabis at one point in time was this um, very unique product, and and I'll just call it what it is. I think there's a lot of hype that was built around the products and around the branding and whatnot, and I think that characteristic and personality of kind of the legacy cannabis operator of building a lot of hype around it was always looking for, like, hey, what's the next new kind of cool drop that's going to really capture a lot of eyeballs. um, and I think during that innovation period, um, people weren't really looking at, like, should we do it or is it the right thing to do? It was just like, hey, this is going to get tons of attention, right? Um, I think of Chris Rock, comedian, and this goes through my head almost daily when I think one of his stand-up comedies, he talks about, you can drive a car with your feet if you want to. It doesn't make it a good idea. Um, and and I feel oftentimes that I see these companies that are looking for some type of desperation, not desperation, but they're looking for some type of differentiation.
Mhm.
Um, you know, coming up with these wild ideas of saying, "Hey, let's do this. It'll put us on the map." And um, and so for them, I'm not sure a lot of cycles of testing is really even being done, because again,
Right.
there's no one policing the hardware side of this. It's an
Mhm.
afterthought.
Yeah.
Um, for us, we're a relatively small company that has to be very resourceful. Um, we feel like that we can't release something that's not going to work, and so we put tremendous amount of thought into it. Um, the Earth, what it is today, started back in 2020. So we've got 4.5, 5 years of development into this, and it's been a constant evolution of, like, okay, let's do this, let's try this. Uh, and I almost kind of feel like I feel like sometimes how Google will launch something and they'll do it kind of in a beta phase, and it's
Yeah.
not really perfect and it's glitchy, but they'll get that feedback and then they'll improve upon it, improve upon it, and improve upon it. We've done that, I think, with friendly customers and partners and just kind of testing. But yeah, when I look at where we are today, we're such a different company because we're not launching, hey, Mr. Customer, we've got a portfolio of 50 different product SKUs for you to
Right.
choose from. We've got one, you know, and we got different iterations of that one because, we're not looking to be, you know, all things to all people. We're going after a very specific audience and type of customers who says, hey, you know what? I want our differentiation around what we're doing to be based on these principles and values, right?
Mm, yeah.
Um, and so, going back to Chris, it's amazing in the early days when you talk to a cannabis guy and you talk to these vape lounge guys, like if you suggested that vape hardware, that there was this kind of like crossover or cross pollination between both industries, they were gonna shut you down. It's like, oh no, weed is weed and e-cig is e-cig, and they're completely, two separate, totally different industries and cultures. Um, and to suggest that a weed pen would look like a Nick Salt's pen today was unheard of. But
Hmm.
today now they want it to look that way because it's the new form of discretion, right? Before it's like, oh, hey, we want this thing to be black and discreet and fit at the palm of your hand where people can't see it. Now it's like, hey, no, we want that thing to look exactly like, you know, a Nick device because that's how we can kind of get away with using it anywhere we want. And again, with us, our philosophy is that we don't want to be associated with that. To us, we've got this kind of these roots that, like, just like Heath talked about, there's people in my family and personal networks that have benefited greatly medically because of what cannabis has done for them and has allowed them to do when they're alive. And so we kind of feels like, no, the last thing that we want is we don't want our device to be mistaken for, you know, um, a Nick Salt device out there that kids are getting popcorn lung, or that are appealing to kids with bright colors and all this stuff.
Hmm.
So yeah, to answer your question, we're constantly going through innovation. It never ends. We wake up every day and we're not happy with the products that we have. And I don't necessarily think it's the perfectionist in us. I just think that, like, we're constantly looking for how to just improve not only our products, but again, the user experience, the industry in general. And I think one of the things that's also very different and with how we innovate is that with a, with my time in China and a lot of these factories that produce this vape hardware, you've got the big guys that are e-cig guys, and they've got a history of being an e-cig. Obviously C-Cell and S'more and some of these guys being them. But then you've got thousands of these kind of just mid-tier, smaller factories, right? And these guys don't have long histories of being an e-cig. A couple years ago, they were making fidget spinners. Well, that they were making, ba- you know, battery packs. Essentially, they're chasing anything to make money.
Right.
And to me, I think that's one of the challenges too, is that they're not pushing out products that are saying, hey, we care about the future and the safety of the industry. Where with us, we want to try to protect the industry because every time there's a problem with a vape product and it makes headlines, that impacts our industry and it impacts
Yeah.
our future and our livelihoods, right? When the EVALI thing came out and there was this big scare, it's like, you know what? Um, Bad operators out there are going to ruin it for us guys out there that are trying to do it the right way.
Hmm.
So that's where I know that I come across sometimes highly critical of, I think, some of the things that I see happening in our industry, and I'm very vocal about it. I don't hide my concerns. It's not because I want to be a hater in the industry, but it's because I
Hmm.
want to protect the future of this industry. And I think that we need responsible operators that will say, hey, you know what? Even if the laws and the regulations out there say that we should, don't exist, that we shouldn't do this, we shouldn't do it, right? And so,
Hmm.
like, when Ebola came out, like, that was when our business exploded, because that's when heavy metals testing came out, and we were the cleanest hardware in the industry. I mean, we passed every test that there was, because because we had future planned
Yeah.
for anticipating that failure, or blind spot in the industry. And so, with sustainability, we were just, Keith and I were having a conversation earlier, and we are saying, hey, we've been talking about this for almost 5 years now. It's really been almost like the last 6 to 9 months where it's finally people are waking up, and they're like, oh, hey, you know what? Like, these things might be a problem. And they're calling us about it, and we've got a solution that's really mature
Yeah.
and tested and proven for them. So it's like, oh, hey, someone called us up, and we got to just throw together something and make it look like it's sustainable, or check off the boxes. We've got something that's really complete and well, very well thought out. But again, that's
Mhm.
4 to 5 years of evolution.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a long road, man, especially when you see competitors moving product to market and you're like, we've got something coming. I think back to the Lexus LFA, or was it LAF? LFA. Yeah, they took forever, but it was superior to everything when they finally brought it out. But in this case, AVEO will see the sales. Guys, before we wrap, I want to ask if you could share the various backgrounds, been in the industry a long time. Share it doesn't have to be crazy, but maybe one of the most profound moments in the industry that you've had, that you either felt super grateful to be in it, or maybe perplexed as to why you're still in it. But if we could go around, I'd love to hear those stories. Those stories that really drive me. Keith, we'll start with you.
Yeah, so this is probably about 2016, and um, I was helping out a dispensary, and this one gentleman who very very similar to me in age, in background, Asian, born here in Canada. Uh, at this time, he had a daughter, 1 or 2 years old, uh, but his wife actually reached out and said, "My husband has terminal cancer. He's only got a few months to live, but the medicines are making him so sick, nauseous, zombie-like. Uh, this isn't the right pathway to take for the last days of my husband's life. Um, can you help with some cannabis oils?" And this was in my early days. So on the West Coast here, the big thing for cancer is RSO, Rick Simpson oil.
Hmm.
And we were able to get some really good quality Rick Simpson oil over to this person based out of Ontario. And I I spent that time guiding the wife how to take it and what this medicine, uh, how it would impact her husband. Start off slow, dose it up a little bit to get to a spot where the nausea would go away, that they would have a good quality of mind frame and be able to communicate. And I remember how happy she was and how happy he was. And about 3 months later, uh, I got a message saying, "We don't need the oils anymore. Thank you so much for everything you've done." And I remember at this moment talking to the team how sad it was,
Hmm.
because we knew that this person had passed away. And it really hit me deeply because, here's a person that at this time is like late 30s, just starting off his life, and he gets something out of his control.
Yeah.
He gets something that could hit anybody. And we sent over a card, just saying, thank you so much for trusting us with your medicine. And we hope that, the final days of your husband uh, was really fruitful. And she gave us a call back and just said, "You don't know how much this medicine has helped us. Just to see my husband be the way he is for his final days was all the difference
Yeah.
versus him being drugged out and constantly throwing up." Uh, it really impacted me in a deep way,
Yeah.
in a manner where I felt that, despite not being a doctor, despite a lot of research going out there and a lot of controversy, we impacted one person's life for the better. And that person, it will always be grateful for, that type of oil, that type of medicine for the final days.
Yeah.
That's
Wow.
something that still sticks with me. I still think about that family. I still think about that person. Um, and you know, I've been really lucky because since then, directly, I've been able to impact over 50,000 patients.
Wow.
And it's something that matters a lot to me, the medicinal component of the cannabis plant.
Hmm.
It goes against somewhat um, what I believe in the recreational market, but it is what it is. People can choose whatever medicine they want for whatever conditions. And some people will say boredom is a condition, right? And so, how people consume this plant, I believe if the right stewards are in place, the right policies are in place, and the right education, if you will, if we educate the population and the youths and the seniors out there about cannabis, the more we learn, the more data we get, the better we can really utilize God's plants. And I believe that cannabis and other things out there, they're all natural and they're here for a reason.
Yeah.
It's up to us to determine how to best utilize that.
No, that's beautiful, man. That's the truth for sure. I think about it all the time, right? As 30 plus years consuming, and in the early days it was recreational, and then you realize, hold on, like, started with hockey accidents at the age of 12 and in ICU and on all the medications and anti-inflammatories, then back surgery and all. You go through it again, and then you realize this isn't a crutch, it's to help me cope and help me get through but in the end, you're not on the oxys, you're not on all the baclofens and all these other bullshit drugs that pharma pumps down your throat. And I'm not hard against doctors. That's their toolbox. Those are the tools in their toolbox. If I wanted it different, I'd go to a holistic nutritionist or practitioner, right, to find something alternative. So that's a beautiful story, man, and good on you. I mean, being able to support and help individuals through, their most trying times and needs. That's awesome. That's awesome. Chris, you don't have to go as quite as deep as that when it comes to that, but I'm very curious
How do I follow that up?
what interaction, and it could even be, what, I was at this conference and this fucker, he was hounding me for better price. I don't know what it is, but what's the most profound story that you have that you can recall?
Yeah, well, I think twofold. I mean, the Lyft story I think was obviously the pivotal thing that shifted my whole life. I mean, I think
Yeah.
that and this whole trajectory of the business was that Lyft show and the lineup and some guy trying to give us cash and just how. But I want to echo like a bigger thing of why it's so cool and why I love the cannabis industry so much is that it was a like entrepreneur's dream to be able to like fall into this industry and help shape so many important and massive pieces of the space that again impact all these end customers and all these companies. And to do it at at my age when I first started and being able to be in the room with the executives of a massive MSO and guide them on their automation journey across 12 or 15 facilities is pretty cool. Or have the C-Cell president fly down to ATG and talk about preloaded trays because I was ringing the bell 5 years ago saying we need to have preloaded foam trays on our equipment. And C-Cell's president finally got heard of this and got a wind of it 2 years, 3 years later and flew down to visit us and is like, what is these preloaded trays? Because I'm losing business to guys like AVEO who have preloaded trays and Easy Press. It's a true story, which I think when that happened, that was pretty cool. The fact that, my team and stuff, we can have so much impact to the industry that, such a big player actually started to shift how they were doing their manufacturing process, given, and based off conversations and innovations that, we did with groups like AVEO. It's pretty cool that you could have that impact. And I mean, I don't think there's a lot of industries in the world, in the last couple of decades, obviously tech, but outside of tech and the internet, this has been my, early
Yeah.
2000s.
This is your industrial revolution.
Yeah, from my perspective. So it's been great. There's been a lot of those kind of moments that you look back and you kind of have to reflect on it and pinch yourself, being like, it's really cool that I can have this impact. And did I ever think, and going into university, I'd have this would be my 20s and my first kind of career and industry to be involved in? No, I had no idea. And it's so cool to be part of that. And I forever am just gonna be grateful, and we've met amazing people, and we're in this conversation together, and lifelong friends now, and people have just benefited so much from it. So
Yeah.
it's super
Wow.
cool.
I'm thinking, you're 29, you've got a decade of experience in this industry already. Like, fast forward, assuming you stay in the industry another decade or two, you'll have more. The only person I can think of, Keith, you'll appreciate this, is Max Walters, right? So, terpy, big concentrates, and then he's got terpy, an AVEO customer as well. But I mean, he was taking photography, and like he was like 14 in the facilities taking, photography of plants and stuff. Probably shouldn't have been in there, but kudos to Scott and his dad for bringing him in. But dude, like a decade already, that's awesome. That's awesome.
Dude, that's
Jonathan, how about you, my friend?
Well, I mean, I think I shared this on the last time we spoke. My wife doesn't like to talk too much about it, but she was obviously a big reason why we looked at cannabis early on, and similar stories, medical issues that became incredibly complicated. Nothing seemed to work. Several years of frustration, lots and lots of medical bills piling up. Cannabis being introduced to her, and just completely changing her life, which of course affected me significantly. And was one of the reasons why we got into this space. And so, I think that for all of us that have been in this industry, there's highs and lows to it. There's challenges and things that we're grateful for, and lots of learning that has happened. Um, and s- when the bad days are bad, being able to kind of look back and be like, man, like what it's done for us personally, um, our relationship, and for her, just really getting her life back, is something that we'll be forever grateful for this industry, and the reason why we want it to thrive, and the reason why we want it to continue to exist, and the reason why we want safe access, and we want safe products, and we want responsible and smart ways, of business practices to continue and to develop.
Yeah. Wow. And I do recall the story, and at the time I was like, man, if for any other reason, of course, right? You want to make sure that you're able to take care of your own family and ensure that they're, healthy. Like it's the last thing. So gents, listen, so Jonathan's going to go to bed. Chris and Keith are going to start their day, and I'm going to finish my day. This is the weirdest. All we need is someone on from Australia, I think, as well, which was crazy. I remember those days in Ample going, oh my God, a sales call with Australia at this time of day? Okay, let's do it.
it's my life now.
That's your life now. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Well, listen, though, I do appreciate you joining me. I know you're all very busy, but taking the time to spend with me, just getting your stories out there, helping people understand what the industry looks like. I mean, we don't live in the microcosm sometimes. It's very high level. What's going on? What's going on in the world? What's going on in Ontario versus BC? And having you just share your perspective, your history and experience it's been awesome. Awesome hour and a half, however long it's been. But I appreciate you all.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
So much. Thanks so much, Chris and JC.
Thanks, guys. Have a good day.
Like, guys.
Thanks,
Super fun.
guys.
Bye.